You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Miller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. We need to talk about boundaries. If you're active on social media, you've probably seen a million posts talking about the importance of boundary setting. However, a lot of the advice that's given on setting boundaries is just plain wrong. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's show. Many folks are under the mistaken impression that boundaries are about controlling someone else's behavior, that they're about changing another person so that you can get what you want. In reality, though, boundaries are about self-understanding and getting in touch with our own limits and needs and learning how to communicate those to other people in our lives. So we're going to explore what boundaries are and aren't, how to set healthy boundaries, the problems with being a people pleaser, and so much more. We're also going to discuss why boundaries aren't just important in our romantic and sexual relationships, but also in all of the other relationships we have in our lives. I am joined once again by Casey Davis, the best-selling author of How to Keep House While Drowning. A licensed therapist, she is the creator of the popular Struggle Care website and Instagram and the Domestic Blisters TikTok. Her latest book is titled Who Deserves Your Love? How to Create Boundaries to Start, Strengthen, or End Any Relationship. This is going to be another fascinating episode. Before we get into the main topic for today, though, here is our Just the Tip segment presented by Popstar. Popstar was founded by two sexual medicine doctors who are creating science-backed products to support male sexual health and pleasure. Whether you want to last longer, finish stronger, enhance your health, or just make sex more pleasurable, they have a solution for you. In our Just the Tip segments, I'm sharing tips and tricks on boosting bedroom confidence and performance. Today, we're diving into the subject of how to navigate conversations around porn and masturbation in relationships. Let's talk about it. So the theme of this episode is relationship boundaries, and we're going to talk all about that in a little bit. But in romantic relationships specifically, boundaries often exist around both masturbation and porn, but a lot of partners have never really discussed these things and aren't on the same page at all about them. For example, maybe one partner feels that using porn is a totally normal thing to do, while the other sees it as disrespectful or even hurtful. Likewise, maybe one person masturbates regularly and sees it as part of their own self-care routine, while the other sees it as a sign of disinterest or a lack of attraction. These are very real, very common conflicts. And what makes them especially tricky is that they touch on a lot of deeply personal stuff, including desire, trust, emotional safety, and one's own sexual and relationship values. So the first thing I want to say is that it's okay to have different views on these things, and it's not helpful to get into accusations about who's right and who's wrong, or whose feelings are valid and whose aren't. What matters is how you and your partner feel about these things and whether you're both willing to talk about them with honesty and respect. Now, if you're the person who feels hurt or uncomfortable with your partner's masturbation or porn use, take some time to ask yourself why. What is it about these activities that makes you uncomfortable? Is it about secrecy? Is it about feeling rejected? Does it tap into a deeper fear about not being attractive or desirable enough? Is it because you think porn is inherently exploitative? What's the real root of your concern? On the flip side, if you're the person who uses porn or masturbates, take some time to think about what these activities mean to you. Are they about physical release and pleasure, stress relief, exploring your sexuality, or living out a fantasy? More often than not, self-pleasure doesn't signify sexual dissatisfaction in one's relationship or a lack of love. But sometimes it does become a compensatory thing because there's a lack of sex or connection in the relationship. So understanding your motivations is important. Now, a lot of partners just assume that they're on the same page about porn and masturbation, and they never discuss these issues until they become a problem. One partner walks in on the other while they're masturbating or stumbles onto their porn search history, and then suddenly it's a huge deal. So here's the thing we need to do. Have the conversation before it becomes a crisis, and do it early on in your relationship. And start with curiosity, not confrontation. It can be something as simple as, how do you feel about masturbation? Or what are your thoughts on porn? Then it's a matter of listening and also articulating your feelings and perspective. However, the goal is not to argue or prove a point, but really to understand each other and where each person is coming from. If you find that you have different values and beliefs around these things, then you can start talking about boundaries. However, the goal isn't to try and control one another's emotional reactions or sexual behaviors, but rather to come up with solutions that are mutually acceptable. So, for example, if one partner has concerns about porn being exploitative, then maybe the partner who watches it could explore the world of ethical porn. Maybe there's a way to create space for porn and self pleasure in that relationship that's mutually acceptable. As another example, maybe there are ways that one partner's masturbation can be eroticized. For example, if you fantasize about your partner while you masturbate, could conveying how you just couldn't resist touching yourself because the thought of your partner just drives you wild transform an activity that stokes insecurity into something that provides validation? There's no one size fits all solution here, and different people will need to figure out different boundaries. You're also going to need to figure out whether these things are actual relationship deal breakers for you or not, because if they are, and you're on totally different pages, it might not be the right relationship for either of you, which is again why it's important to talk about this early on. So if you've been avoiding this conversation with your partner, consider this a nudge, because talking about these issues can help to prevent a bigger crisis later on and help you to determine how compatible your sexual values are. All right, that wraps up our Just the Tip segment presented by Popstar. A huge thank you to our friends over at Popstar for sponsoring the segment and helping us all to have better and more pleasurable sex. To that end, be sure to check out Popstar's own line of doctor-approved lubes, supplements, and delay sprays over at popstarlabs.com/Justin, where you can save 20% off your first order by using my name, Justin, as the discount code. We have much more ahead on today's show, including a deep dive into the world of relationship boundaries. So stick around, and we're going to jump in right after this short break. If you love the science of sex as much as I do, consider becoming a friend of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. The Kinsey Institute is the world's premier research organization on sex and relationships, and you can help them continue the legacy of Dr. Alfred Kinsey, whose pioneering research changed everything we think we know about sex. Visit kinseyinstitute.org to make an impact. Your donations can help support ongoing research projects on critical topics. You can also show your support by following Kinsey Institute on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for supporting Sex Science. Are you curious about sex and psychology in other countries? Join me and Sexual Health Alliance as we expand your knowledge through their study abroad programs. Let's explore different cultures, engage in immersive learning experiences, and collaborate with international experts while traveling to amazing places and having fun with students from all around the world. Since 2015, Sexual Health Alliance has remained at the forefront of sexuality education. So join me, Shaw, and a global community of students for a transformative study abroad adventure. There are 4 study abroad options throughout 2025. Check them out at sexualhealthalliance.com. Come meet fantastic people and be at the leading edge of sexual health education with Sexual Health Alliance. Spots for 2025 are available now, so visit sexualhealthalliance.com to secure yours today and embark on an exciting global adventure to study sex and psychology with me. Okay, Casey, let's talk about boundaries in relationships. So let's start first by talking about what you mean by the term boundary. So as a therapist, how do you define this? What's a boundary?
Okay, I'm going to get a little esoteric for a second. I define boundary as an internal understanding of where my responsibilities end and your responsibility begins. The reason I define it that way is because the opposite of boundaries is control. It's wanting to control somebody else's behavior. It's wanting to change someone else. And it's this belief that if I could just find the right magical formula to behave and to act and to say and to speak, that will create, like it is an X plus Y formula, a behavioral change in this other person. And you might hear that and think, well, I don't think that. But most people do. Mm-hmm. And that's why we end up kind of tearing our hair out. Well, I approached him and screamed and he didn't change. So then I approached him and I cried and he didn't change. And then I approached him and I reminded him of his obligations and his responsibilities and he didn't change. And I saw this a lot when working with addiction. You know, you have someone who loves their loved ones so much and wants them to stop using, substances. And you watch in family therapy them have the same conversation over and over and over. You're hurting this family. You're hurting this family. And I'd go, Mom, how many times do you think you've told Johnny that? Oh, at least 1,000. Okay. what is the purpose of telling him 1001 times? Because yes, there is a degree of being boundaried that is about speaking truth and about sharing how somebody else's behavior impacts you. But again, when we find ourselves repeating that over and over and over, we have to go, am I saying this because I believe that I have a responsibility to be honest with this person? Or am I saying this because I hope that this time, if I say it just right, I will finally get through to him and he will have a change of behavior. And so boundaries is about understanding that difference. When is what I'm saying and doing in our relationship about me showing up the way I believe I am supposed to show up? And when is it about me kind of scrambling to just try and get you to do what I want you to do?
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Now, we often hear this concept of boundaries in the world of pop psychology, and we hear a lot of people throwing this term around constantly as therapy speak has entered the mainstream. But people often misuse this term. So I think you kind of alluded to this in your previous answer, but break it down for us a little bit more. What do people get wrong about establishing boundaries?
So a really great example of this is, let's say that you and your sister brings up weight a lot. She brings up your weight. She brings up other people's weight. Let me give you a new diet, or, oh, you're looking a little chubby. And so we talk about, okay, what do we do in this relationship? And you'll have someone bring up, you've got to have boundaries. But often what that becomes is they say, you need to have a boundary and tell your sister not to comment on your weight. That's the boundary. You will not comment on my weight. The issue with that is that you can't put a boundary on someone else's behavior, right? Like, I don't control what comes out of my sister's mouth. And so if I get into this loop of I asked you and I begged you and I got angry at you, what am I doing here? So then you have people come in and go, well, it's not about what they do. It's about what you do. So, you say, if you bring up my weight again, then I will. And you give a consequence. And this is where I just feel exhausted, because no adult should be trying to discipline another adult. It is not your job to come up with the right amount of consequences to make people treat you with respect. Because number one, you don't know what will make that person stop. Number two, it's impractical. What if your sister is willing to withstand things you're not? And so they'll say, well, what you have to say is, if you bring up my weight again, I'm going to end this conversation. Now, you can do that. That is a fine course of action. But it's, why are we doing that? Am I doing that because if I refuse to have a conversation and I walk away every time, my sister will finally get the message and she'll stop commenting on my weight? Because she might not. So if she doesn't, have you created a livable situation for yourself? Do you really want to walk away from every single conversation your sister has that brings up weight if she never stops? Maybe you do. Because maybe you're going, no, seriously, that course of action is not based on trying to get my sister to stop. It's based on the fact I genuinely cannot maintain my well-being if I stay in the conversation. So no matter how disruptive it is, I have to literally leave the conversation. Great, then I'm with you. But what if your sister watches your kids for you while you work? What if you live with your sister? What if your sister is the kind of person who is going to have a big dramatic explosion every time you just hang up the phone, right? So when you talk about, here's what I'm going to do if that person does this, your if has to be a livable situation for you that makes your life better. It might be more painful. It might be really hard, but it's something in the long run. We see this a lot in romantic relationships where their last ditch effort is like, if you don't stop cheating on me, I'm going to leave. If you don't stop using, I'm going to leave. And a lot of times people aren't actually prepared to leave because they don't want to leave. They just want to find the magical trump card that will get through to this person. And it puts us in this weird chess game with people where we're looking for the leverage. And in that dynamic, the person with most power always wins. Because what if my mother is willing to withstand not being in a relationship with me longer than I am? What if my husband is willing to withstand the silent treatment longer than me? It just doesn't work. And so if we instead think about, okay, my sister's making these comments on my weight and it really affects me. Well, what in there is my responsibility and what in there is her responsibility? Well, her responsibility is to look at her behavior, listen to my feedback, consider my feelings, and adjust her behavior. But I don't have any control. I cannot make her do those things. So then what is my responsibility? Well, what am I responsible for? I'm responsible in a relationship for being honest with my sister. I'm responsible for standing up for myself. I'm also responsible for understanding that what my sister believes about my weight does not have to dictate my reality. It's not the truth. She might believe that it lowers my value or makes me not pretty, but I don't have to believe that. And so it might look like saying, please don't talk about my weight anymore. But it might look like saying, I'm not going to talk to you at all. It might look like what I refer to as return awkward descender. So maybe you're someone who, when your sister brings it up, you go, oh, and you kind of laugh it off. You act like it's okay. Because again, that's a boundary violation because you're taking, well, if I bring it up with her, she's going to feel bad. Well, her feeling bad is not your responsibility, right? So I'm taking responsibility. So if I really understand where the line is, where I'm responsible for and what she's responsible for, I'm only responsible for speaking up and being honest about when her behavior affects me negatively. She's the one responsible for dealing and managing with the feelings that that gives her. As long as I believe I've met my responsibility to be honest, kind, and respectful in my delivery, according to how appropriate the relationship is, like I actually don't have to manage her feeling bad or guilty or anger, any of that. And there might be somebody who is the most boundaried person in the world who decides, actually, like what being boundaried looked like for me is to just leave this alone. Is to just kind of roll my eyes every time she says something. And maybe I have a best friend that's on standby that I call when I'm done. And I go, oh, okay, I need to vent. Like maybe that's you being extremely boundaried. Like not every instance of being boundaried has to be you being girl boss, like making some big scene and you know, you will not say these things to me. Like it's so much more varied than that. And it's so much more subtle than that. It really has to do with that hurts, but I know that that comes from my sister's issues and I don't have to own those issues. And, you know, what's going to make me feel like I've met my obligations to myself and my sister and how I behave in this way that creates a future that I actually want to exist in with her.
Yeah. It makes sense to me, but there are going to be some people who don't like what you've had to say there, right? Because they like to think about boundaries as setting what their limits are. And often boundaries are kind of being used as a way of enforcing control in relationships. You know, if you think about, let's say in the context of romantic relationships, there are lots of disagreements over something like porn use, you know, and if one partner is using pornography, in many cases, the other partner feels very uncomfortable with that. And so they'll want to try and create a boundary around porn. And they'll want that boundary to look like, well, I want my partner to not use porn anymore, right? And that often doesn't work out so well when people try to enforce boundaries in those ways where it's used as a way to try to control somebody else's behavior and where there's this ultimatum or consequence that's attached to it. And so I wish we could say that setting boundaries was easy and like, here's like a simple way to do it and all boundaries are going to look the same, but it just doesn't kind of work that way in practice.
Yeah, like it is a totally valid like boundary for you to decide like, I'm not going to be in a relationship with someone who watches porn. That might mean you don't get to be in a relationship with the person in front of you. Mm-hmm. You can't make them a person that doesn't watch porn. Now, that doesn't mean you have to accept it. It doesn't mean that you have to pretend like you're okay with it. And it also, you know, maybe you're not willing to leave that person. That doesn't make you weak to decide, I would love for that to be my boundary, but the reality is I'm not actually willing to live in a reality where I'm not in a relationship with this person. And you have to talk to people you trust to make sure that that's a decision that you really do want, that you're not making it out of fear that's unfounded, that you're not making that out of problems with your own self-worth. And like you want to make sure you're making that based on truth, not lie.
Yeah.
So if it's, I'm just afraid no one else will love me, so I have to settle for it. Well, that's a lie. We don't want to make a decision based on that. But if it's like, man, I know what I'm worth. I know that I can't control him. I know that this is going to be painful. And, you know, that's all true. If you are admitting that and that's all true and you're going, and I'm not willing to leave. whatever the reason is, like you get to make that decision. You get to say, I'm not willing to leave because every other thing in this relationship is great and perfect. I'm not willing to leave because we've been married too long. I'm not willing to leave because we have small children. I'm not willing to leave because, I don't have the financial freedom to leave. I think that removing the judgment, the self-judgment, and even like accepting the judgment from others from that place is like, that's being boundaried.
Yeah.
I'm just going to own this decision. As long as you're making that based on truth, I'm there to support you.
Yeah. And, I think there can be something valuable too in kind of analyzing where these boundaries that we believe we have are coming from. So, for example, if you want your boundary to be, I don't want my partner to use porn, well, what's the deeper meaning behind a partner's porn use for you? Does it reflect some level of attachment anxiety? Does it reflect some other kind of insecurity that's going on that you really don't believe that your partner loves you, or you think it's a trust violation? Or is it because you think pornography is inherently degrading to women or something along those lines? There can be a lot of different reasons why someone is uncomfortable with porn use, but it might not necessarily be about the porn. It might be about some deeper anxiety or insecurity. And maybe there is some other way of managing that in the relationship that looks different from trying to impose this boundary and saying, you're not allowed to use porn if you're going to be in a relationship with me.
I always say, like, never miss an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you do wholeheartedly believe, like, I believe it's unethical. I believe it's exploitive. I believe that, it's a slippery slope. Like, you can believe those things. And you can go, man, and I'm really worried that you're not going to see me as attractive if you're looking at, these like perfect bodies you're looking for. I'm afraid of what that means about me. It doesn't mean that your other like objections aren't real. Mm-hmm. We said at the last episode, like, healing happens in the context of relationships. So if there's that part of you that it's bringing up, like, you get that opportunity to look at that and to work on that. It doesn't mean that you let go of your other values.
Yep.
And I do, I have a relationship decision tree in my book for people who are trying to decide, what boundaries to have and whether to stay or to go. And for the reason that you mentioned, the first question is actually, why does this behavior bother me? And there's 3 possible answers. And one is, it hurts or harms me directly. Like, I'm affected by this. The next behavior is like, it doesn't hurt or harm me directly, but I am against it in principle. And then the third option is, the people around me are telling me that this should be unacceptable. And so whether that is a religious community, whether that is your friends, whether that is your parents, or whether that's kind of cultural messages, there's a lot of things that we're going, oh, well, this didn't bother me before, but now everyone's saying it should bother me. Maybe, is there something wrong in my relationship? Should I do something? And you're right. Like, it really does start with what in me is bringing up why this is bothersome.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Looking to boost your bedroom performance? Our friends over at Popstar have you covered. The easy-to-use lidocaine-based Popstar Delay Spray relaxes nerve cells and postpones your climax, helping you to go the distance while keeping premature ejaculation and performance anxiety at bay. It's the strongest anti-climax spray in the market to maximize pleasure for both you and your partner, and importantly, it was formulated by doctors and is backed by science. Popstar's Delay Spray will not transfer to your partner, and you'll still feel everything, just for longer. It's also quick and easy, no pills, no weird rituals. Just spray, wait for it to take effect, and unlock your full bedroom potential. Boost your sexual confidence and performance with Popstar Delay Spray. Save 20% off your first order by using my name, Justin, as the discount code. Check the show notes for the link or visit popstarlabs.com/Justin. That's popstarlabs.com/Justin. Now, one of the tricky things about navigating boundaries is that most of us have responsibility to multiple people in our lives, and that can create some tension. So, for example, consider the relationship that you have with your partner, and then the relationship that you have with your parents, or even your best friend. And in trying to respect the boundaries that your partner has set, it can feel like that's stepping on the relationship that you have with someone else. And that can be uncomfortable because it feels like respecting our partner's boundary is going to hurt somebody else's feelings. feelings. And then people can feel like they're in this no-win situation where no matter what you do, someone's going to be hurt. So how do we navigate this? Dealing with the fact that we have multiple relationships and different responsibilities to different people.
I think it really does help to sit down. Either you can do it by yourself, you can do it with a friend, and really try to outline, what are my responsibilities to this person? And there's a lot of variables that go into that. Certainly how close you are with someone and your history with them, the commitments that you've made to them. One kind of complex situation that might come up is like, let's say you have a sister and you know that your sister is cheating on her husband. And you're going, okay, I don't know what to do. She's saying she's not going to stop. Okay, well, do I tell my brother-in-law? And you're kind of going, I feel like I have an ethical responsibility towards him as a family member, as a friend, as just another person to tell him what's going on. But she's my sister. I feel like I also have this ethical responsibility to not hurt her, or even just a responsibility to not meddle, or a responsibility to not betray her trust, because she said, and I think, that's one of like a thornier situation where you really do have to sit down and go, okay, what are my responsibilities to my sister? Mm-hmm. And what are the circumstances? Because I do have a responsibility to guard the trust that people have with me, but there is a level of hurt, harm, or danger that overrides that. If you tell me you're going to go home and kill someone, if you tell me that you're feeling as though you're going to harm yourself, other variables come into play where I now have new obligations to you. And I think the crux is that your obligations to a person are not wholly formed by managing their emotions and having them be happy with you. That you might have obligations to someone who you love, that if you were to meet those obligations, they would hate you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, when we talk about codependency, quote unquote, that's kind of one of those red flags is like, do I believe my only obligations to a person are those obligations that keep them happy with me? Or do I believe that I have some obligations that might make them uncomfortable? Whether that's an obligation to be honest with them, whether that's an obligation to not keep one of their secrets, to tell them a hard truth, to refuse to hold something for them. I think that can be a great way of thinking through that and making sure that we're kind of on sure footing when we're asking ourselves those questions.
What you've outlined there is something that is a really complex and tricky thing that we all kind of have to navigate. It's sometimes we discover information, secrets about other people. And then there's that question of, do we have an obligation to disclose or report this to someone else in our life? And yeah, these are tricky situations to deal with. And, I appreciate the way that you shared that. But yeah, it's complicated, we'll just say. Now, something you talk about in your book is this concept of people pleasing. And a lot of folks think that people pleasing is about making other people comfortable, but you say it's not really about that. It's about your own comfort. So can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So the story goes that when I was in a 12-step group and I was trying to kind of work on myself, and I went to my sponsor at the time and I said, well, the problem is that I am a people pleaser. She looked at me and said, honey, look around. Ain't nobody pleased. And, what she pointed out was that me always having to manage other people's perceptions of me, that I needed people to like me, I needed people to be unhappy with me. It wasn't about altruism. It wasn't about me sacrificing and being a good person. It was about me not having the skills to tolerate somebody else's displeasure. Other people's displeasure is supposed to be uncomfortable because that's how we are social creatures. If I do something that hurts you, I should be affected by, your pain in that. And yet, as we've established, not every right action is going to make you feel good. And you can do the wrong thing and have people applaud you for it. You can do the right thing and have people hate you for it. You can do the loving thing and have people very angry about it. And you can do something that makes somebody really happy. And it is maybe one of the most cruel things you could do to them. And I think working in addiction for so long, that was one thing that was very clear to me. We had families that were all but participating in this addiction because they were too afraid to speak up for themselves. They were too afraid to say, no, you can't do that here. I'm not going to go along with this. No, I'm not going to lie to your boss again. No, I'm not going to pay for this thing again. But they were so caught up with, I don't want to make them angry. I don't want them to be upset with me. And it always went back to a lack of boundaries and to control. Because if you ask them, why don't you want them to be angry with you? Well, because if they're angry with me, they might go use. Well, if they don't have a place to live, then they might, X, Y, Z. And it's like, okay, again, we're choosing our course of action based on what it might make that person do. And we don't have any guarantee of that. And so there has to be another basis for making our decisions, because the truth is, and you get a sad crash course in this when you're dealing with addiction, you could do all the wrong things, all the most unsupportive things, and your loved one could get sober anyways. And you can do all the right things. You could do everything perfect, and they might still die on your kitchen floor. And so at the end of the day, knowing it could go either way, regardless of what you do, when you put your head on the pillow, how do you want to feel about what you did? Do you want to be feeling, if I'd only done this, if I'd only done that, if I only did, or do you want to go, you know what? I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time, based on truth. I acted with love and I acted with integrity. And if I know that I did that, if the worst happens, I know there's nothing else I could have done. That sometimes life is horrible and heartbreaking and unfair, and I just have to grieve. But I have to let go of this idea that if I just obsess enough on the right course of action, I could prevent the worst from happening. But it does require that you kind of let go of the outcome and find a different basis for how you're going to make your decisions.
Yeah. What you were discussing there reminds me of this concept you discuss in the book called underfunctioning, right? Where you can be in a relationship with somebody who is literally underfunctioning in terms of their boundaries. And, that could be in the context of addiction, but it could also be in the context of something like money management, like your friend who is perpetually in debt and they're always making bad financial decisions and they're coming to you and looking for money or help. Or, that can also be the case with parent-child relationships where you have a kid who's in a lot of debt, keeps coming back and asking for money. And then on the flip side of that, when you're in a relationship with somebody who's underfunctioning, that might lead you to start overfunctioning, right? Where that starts getting into this concept of enabling, right? Where somebody who doesn't have boundaries then is kind of encouraged to not set them because they're kind of getting what they want in the process. So can you talk to us a little bit about that dynamic and how do we prevent ourselves from becoming overfunctioning in these situations that creates that unhealthy dynamic for everyone?
So underfunctioning and overfunctioning are the words that I use instead of codependency, so that we can really identify what's going on. So if we think about boundaries again, in terms of what is my responsibility, what is your responsibility, and we think of it on a continuum. So if we think about, your feelings, my responsibility is to listen to your feelings, to make space for you to have your feelings, to not punish you for your feelings so that it is safe for you to have feelings, to consider your feelings when I make decisions and to think about how you might be impacted. But there is a point in that when I think about my responsibilities in regards to your feelings, there is a point where that ends. And now I've done what I was supposed to do. And now whether you're happy, sad, mad, glad, like at the end of the day, now the rest of that is your responsibility to manage it, to soothe yourself, to address it, to talk, like all of that. And so underfunctioning would be me going, I don't control how you feel. I'm going to do whatever I want and you can deal with it. Well, that's me underfunctioning because now I'm refusing to be responsible for the things I am responsible for, which is being considerate, listening to your feelings, that kind of stuff. But I could also overfunction and go, okay, hey, we're not going to come to Christmas this year because we just had a baby and it's a really long flight. We don't have the money. And maybe your parents, oh, this is so awful. I can't believe you're not going to be. And I go, oh, it's okay. I'm sorry that I did. Or and now I feel like I have to, okay, we'll come. Not because I genuinely changed my mind based on my own criteria, but because I cannot tolerate my parents being mad at me, or I can't tolerate that guilt trip they put on me, or I can't tolerate the, cold shoulder they're going to give me. And so in order to get out of that, right, either I might people please. So I'm going to overfunction by basically doing what they want just because I want to soothe their emotions. Or I could go the opposite way and I could blow up and be really vindictive and lash out because I don't like the way that they're behaving. And I want to apply enough pressure that they will stop that behavior, regardless of whether that pressure is appropriate or cruel or kind or any of that kind of stuff. And so when I overfunction, it could be literal things like I'm paying someone's bills, or it could be emotional things. Now, that doesn't mean that you can never pay someone's bills. It takes a while to kind of thread that needle in my book about, you can look at your friend and going, okay, they're irresponsible. That doesn't mean you can't take care of someone that's irresponsible. You can make that choice, but you have to make that choice based on the truth, which is, why am I doing this? Am I doing it because I can't tolerate them being angry? Am I doing that because I'm so afraid of what's going to happen to them if I don't do this and I'm responsible for, the consequences of their actions? Am I doing that because I feel guilty if I don't do it? Or am I going, you know what? It's not my responsibility to pay their bills. I can't control whether they end up on the street or not. And I still feel like I have a legitimate reason and desire to support this person. And there's a bazillion reasons that could be. Maybe you go, this is my child. This is a family member. This is a person that, they've got maybe some cognitive or some mental health stuff. And I just choose to do this. But you do it with your eyes open rather than your eyes shut.
Yeah, which is all too often how we navigate a lot of decisions in relationships is, doing it with the eyes shut. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Casey. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
Yeah, so my website is called Struggle Care. And from there, you can kind of get everywhere. You can get my book, Who Deserves Your Love. You can go to my socials. I'm Domestic Blisters on TikTok. I also have Facebook and Instagram under the handle Struggle Care. And I've got some cool downloads and things on my website. And that's where you can find me.
Well, great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.